Amid the oppressive heat of a Philippine dawn on January 31, 1945, at Clark Air Base on Luzon, the quietude was pierced solely by the steady buzz of U.S. operations, a sharp departure from the deafening roar of combat that had previously dominated the site. Major Frank T. McCoy, whose professional path had been shaped through intense experience in airborne reconnaissance, noticed an uncharacteristic shake in his fingers while carefully positioning a camera shot. The focus of his lens, a pristine Mitsubishi G4M Betty bomber, marked with tail number 763-12, its body shining with an eerie flawlessness under the intense sunlight of the tropics. He whispered, maybe to his own thoughts or to the motionless machine, "This can't represent their typical blueprint. No military would construct aircraft like this." The plane, a massive cylindrical form of alloy, extended almost 20 meters from its sharp prow to its wide, curved rear, settled firmly on its three-point undercarriage. Its expansive 25-meter wings bore no traces of conflict. The robust 1,500 horsepower, 14-cylinder radial motors mounted on either side looked impeccably untouched. This wasn't some recovered ruin or hastily mended casualty of battle. It stood as a fully assembled, functional bomber, apparently left behind in a rush by its pilots as U.S. forces pressed onward through the Pacific theater. However, it wasn't the Betty's impeccable surface or its formidable dimensions that gripped McCoy so completely, nor were they what would shortly ripple through Allied tactical assessments. The element that seized the attention of the Southwest Pacific's Technical Air Intelligence Unit leader, and that promised to upend perceptions of enemy strategy, lay in a chilling mystery hidden under its sleek facade. Guided by the instincts of a seasoned officer, McCoy directed his team to unfasten the access covers along the wings. The finding inside proved a disclosure so raw and so foreign to established Western flying principles that it would permanently reshape U.S. insights into Japanese wartime mindset. The fuel reservoirs, essential to the plane's very function, stood entirely unprotected. Absent were any self-sealing rubber materials, robust armor layers, sophisticated mechanisms to douse flames, or specialized shielding treatments of any sort. Only a slender, vulnerable sheet of aluminum, likely no more than 2 millimeters in thickness, stood as the sole defense between vast quantities of extremely flammable, high-octane airplane fuel and the destructive bursts from hostile gunfire. For years, Major McCoy had journeyed across the Pacific theater, scrutinizing the mangled, charred husks of numerous downed Japanese planes, gradually unraveling the adversary's engineering mysteries. Yet, none of that experience had braced him for the stark straightforwardness of what he now faced. This solitary, immaculate bomber abandoned amid the U.S. Forces' recapture of Clark Field exposed a blueprint approach so essentially distinct, so mercilessly practical, that it demanded several months of study by Allied experts before they could grasp its far-reaching consequences. The stark calculations emerging from this startling find compelled a profound overhaul in U.S. combat strategies and even shaped the evolution of airplane construction through the war's duration. All the deep-seated beliefs that American aviators cherished regarding the foe's technical prowess, the sacrifices Japanese designers embraced in pursuit of speed and efficiency, and the regard that imperial troops afforded to the safety of their personnel, each one stood ready to be methodically, harshly dismantled by the revelations hidden in this lone, flawless specimen of Japan's premier shore-based attack aircraft. The path to this grim realization had unfolded over a span of 4 years, commencing beneath an unfamiliar sky amid a far more ominous roar. On December 8, 1941, while plumes of smoke continued to rise from the shattered vessels at Pearl Harbor, far across the ocean, a formidable armada of 82 G4M bombers, supported by 26 aging G3M Nell bombers, surged upward into the balmy airspace from their staging grounds on Formosa. Their objective lay at Clark Field, the pinnacle of U.S. aerial strength in the Philippines and a critical bastion blocking Japan's bold imperial ambitions. The assault delivered complete operational shock, an exquisite feat of coordination and synchronization. The enemy group descended exactly at 12:35 p.m., soaring at an impregnable elevation of 20,000 feet, well out of range for the outdated U.S. anti-aircraft defenses. From that lofty vantage, 27 aircraft in the first assault released a ferocious barrage of 636 bombs, carving through Clark Field's airstrips, storage buildings, and essential infrastructure. Even as the reverberations of the blasts lingered in the air, a lethal contingent of Zero fighters dove in low, skimming the treetops with guns blazing, methodically annihilating each plane that had somehow endured the opening strikes. Among the 17 B-17 Flying Fortresses stranded on the tarmac, 12 met instant destruction. Virtually all of the P-40 Warhawk interceptors, which formed the core of regional American aerial protection, were soon transformed into smoldering ruins. Within just 45 minutes, the might of U.S. aviation in the Philippines faced ruthless, near-total eradication. Lieutenant James Harrington, among the scant handful of U.S. aviators who escaped the carnage, observed the catastrophe from the precarious refuge of a protective bunker, his pulse racing wildly in his chest. As the retreating Japanese aircraft dwindled into victorious dots on the northern horizon, he would note in his after-action account, "What struck me was how they came in flawless array, soaring at extreme heights well out of our grasp. Next, the enemy interceptors swooped in and shredded our defenses. Not one of our aircraft could take to the skies, yet the Betty bombers slipped away unscathed. A mere scattering of U.S. fighters that barely lifted off reached the scene far too late, confronting nothing but a vast, taunting expanse of clear air. The Imperial Japanese forces had inflicted far more than a devastating strike. They showcased the remarkable, never-before-seen reach of their aircraft, launching assaults from airfields 460 miles distant, a remarkable display of long-haul flying that outstripped any capability of American bombers during those early days of conflict. The G4M's first full year in battle would emerge as profoundly destructive, underscoring the boldness of its innovative engineering. Just 2 days following the paralyzing assault on Clark Field on December 10, 1941, an imposing squadron of 26 G4M bombers teamed up with the veteran G3M Nell models to unleash a bold landmark raid against Force Z, a formidable Royal Navy squadron built around the grand battleship HMS Prince of Wales and the agile battlecruiser HMS Repulse. The assault unfolded as a ruthlessly orchestrated symphony of destruction beginning around 12:20 in the afternoon. Waves of Japanese bombers descended in tight formation, unleashing their torpedo strikes with a level of exactitude that left British eyewitnesses in profound shock and dread. Equipped with the lethal Type 91 aerial torpedoes, the Betty bombers deployed munitions each tipping the scales at 840 kilograms and armed with a 205-kilogram explosive charge. Engineered with clever adaptations for shallow water environments, these torpedoes could navigate at low depths to target even substantial vessels near shorelines. The onslaught zeroed in mercilessly on the pair of British capital ships, delivering strikes of such lethal precision that their impact would echo enduringly in the annals of naval warfare. The Prince of Wales, an imposing battleship of 43,000 tons displacement and emblematic of Britain's foremost maritime strength, endured no fewer than 6 torpedo impacts, alongside further harm from high-level bombing. The colossal detonations beneath the surface tore enormous breaches in the vessel's structure, unleashing a torrent of inundation that no countermeasures could contain. The once majestic warship tilted perilously, her end now an inescapable fate. The Repulse, a storied battlecruiser built in the era of World War I and substantially refitted in the 1930s, took at least 4 torpedo strikes amid frantic maneuvers to escape the unyielding air onslaught. Although her defensive guns managed to bring down a handful of Japanese planes, this resistance fell far short of thwarting the synchronized torpedo approaches from reaching their marks. The accumulated destruction sealed her doom. Within mere hours of the savage engagement, these 2 grand capital ships overturned and plunged to the depths. The battleship Prince of Wales sank around 1320, with the Repulse succumbing just 13 minutes afterward at 1333. In the churning depths, 841 courageous British seamen lost their lives. Those who endured served as a stark reminder of the assault's swift and ruthless nature, ultimately saved by the accompanying destroyers. The whole confrontation, spanning initial encounter to the last vessel's demise, unfolded in under 2 hours. Naval annals recorded an unprecedented event. Capital ships fully engaged in their own defense, destroyed exclusively through aerial assault amid the vast ocean. The G4M Betty bomber accomplished a feat that naval strategists had long contested in theory, fundamentally reshaping the dynamics of maritime dominance. In just 90 minutes, it dismantled the once impregnable British naval command over Asian seas, a striking demonstration of the aircraft's lethal prowess when deployed in ideal circumstances. During the initial stages of 1942, throughout the vast expanse of the Pacific Campaign, U.S. and Allied aviators faced off against Betty bombers in nearly all significant clashes. With its distinctive outline, the plane appeared to strike with a chilling disregard for risk, hitting objectives from distances that challenged traditional expectations and outstripped what Allied forces could achieve. From distant bases some 1,500 miles removed, it unleashed punishing assaults on Darwin in Australia, revealing an operational span far beyond the grasp of any comparable Allied bomber. Over the rugged peaks of New Guinea, it targeted Port Moresby from remote airstrips, exerting unyielding and oppressive strain on Allied outposts across the southwest Pacific. From Rabaul, more than 600 miles distant, it hammered Guadalcanal, extending Japanese aerial influence over vast oceanic barriers that seemed impossible to breach. This remarkable endurance in flight granted Japanese commanders a level of tactical adaptability and aggressive potential that left Allied leaders, hampered by their aircraft's limited radius, racing to find ways to respond. Fighters from the U.S., typically stationed at advanced outposts, simply couldn't sustain pursuits against Bettys launching from far-off fortified locations. As a result, Allied bases endured non-stop, crippling bombardments from Japanese installations that lay well outside the scope of any counterstrike. Such a stark imbalance in long-range bombing power enabled Japanese units to launch offensives whenever they chose, setting the rules of combat as Allied troops labored just to mount meaningful reprisals or mount sufficient safeguards for their holdings. The pivotal edge, stemming from its innovative engineering, endured during the war's initial half-year, marked by unyielding Japanese advances and Allied withdrawals. The Betty bombers featured prominently in nearly all significant Japanese assault campaigns, spanning the broad reaches of the Pacific and Southeast Asia. With remarkable precision, they hammered objectives in the Philippines, Malaya, the Netherlands, East Indies, New Guinea, and the Solomon Islands. Throughout the Pacific theater, these aircraft offered vital backing to naval campaigns, serving as the extended reach of the Imperial Japanese Navy. They carried out essential scouting tasks that surpassed the capabilities of any enemy planes, delivering priceless insights into enemy movements. During those initial victorious phases, the Betty emerged as the emblem of Japan's aerial might, its astonishing range, its fearsome potency, and its apparently relentless advance. Yet this powerful edge, so essential to the nation's initial triumphs, rested on a single vital, unstated premise: minimal resistance from Allied interceptors. When groups of Bettys could raid objectives unchallenged, when they could descend from elevations out of range for ground defenses, when they could unleash their lethal ordnance and withdraw prior to the launch of hostile aircraft, the bomber proved ruthlessly potent, nearly invincible. Such scenarios defined the engagements of early 1942, an era marked by the Allies' pitifully inadequate air forces, scattered and reeling from Japan's opening assaults. Come the middle of 1942, though, the strategic landscape started shifting in a somber, inevitable manner. With U.S. fighter numbers growing robustly, as the nimble yet underpowered Wildcats yielded to the superior Hellcats and Corsairs, as aviator skills sharpened, and as combat strategies adapted to exploit Japanese weaknesses, the bomber's operators noted a worrisome surge in casualties. The transition from supremacy to acute peril crystallized beyond doubt on August 8, 1942. That pivotal date saw 23 G4M bombers from the prestigious 4th Air Group lift off from Rabaul, bound for strikes against U.S. forces on the strategic Guadalcanal. Enemy interceptors, flying out of the newly established Henderson Field, engaged the squadron with deadly accuracy above Savo Island, a locale destined to echo with the intensity of both sea and sky battles. During that fierce clash, which unfolded as a merciless and lopsided slaughter in the skies, 18 out of the 23 Betty bombers fell swiftly to enemy fire. Around 120 Japanese pilots lost their lives in an incident later noted as the most catastrophic G4M defeat throughout the Guadalcanal campaign, delivering a crushing impact on Japanese spirits and combat capabilities. Across numerous battles, American and Allied fighter pilots consistently shared a haunting insight. The Betty would burst into flames after just a few strikes. A mere 2 or 3 precise shots striking the body or wings in spots that might only damage a sturdier plane triggered utter destruction. This plane soon acquired a collection of dark, eerie monikers that raced through U.S. squadrons like brushfire, underscoring its alarming vulnerability. They dubbed it the Flying Cigar for its unique silhouette. Terms like one-shot lighter and flying Zippo emerged too, derisive but spot-on labels for the Betty's dreadful habit of erupting into a sudden, ferocious blaze from even slight combat harm. Come October 1942, as Lieutenant Commander John Thomas Blackburn reached Guadalcanal to lead VF-17 while piloting the powerful F-4U Corsairs, the Betty's dreaded image had flipped entirely. What was once seen as an unassailable emblem of Japanese air power now stood exposed as a clear, targetable flaw. The initial encounter with the Betty group left us stunned at how readily they dropped, Blackburn recounted years later, his tone still laced with astonishment. Strike the body or wings in any spot, and they would ignite. The pursuers now found themselves pursued, a reversal that underscored the irony of the skies over the Pacific. Yet the profound root cause of the Betty's devastating weakness, the specific design choices that had made such devastating casualties unavoidable, remained elusive until U.S. troops managed to seize undamaged specimens of the plane for thorough, methodical scientific scrutiny. A pivotal moment in gathering intelligence arrived that November of 1942, as Australian troops, displaying unyielding bravery in battle, seized control of Japanese bases at Buna in Papua New Guinea. Scattered among the deserted plains, specialists from technical air intelligence teams uncovered a number of Betty bombers bearing different degrees of harm from combat. Early inspections of these somewhat preserved machines laid bare, in a sobering manner, the observations shared by aviators during their urgent post-mission accounts. The fuel reservoirs offered zero safeguards of any kind. Experts in aviation from the Allied Technical Air Intelligence Unit in the Southwest Pacific promptly launched the initial in-depth organized study. When the panels on the wings were pried apart, the harsh reality emerged. Fuel compartments made from fragile aluminum sheets, entirely without a rubber lining for sealing, missing any shielding layer, and utterly lacking mechanisms to actively combat fires. Even though the various Betty bombers inspected at Buna had sustained diverse amounts of fighting wear, they all exhibited the same features in their fuel system architecture. These traits stemmed not from the effects of warfare or rushed alterations by frantic maintenance personnel on the ground. The hallmark of Japanese aircraft engineering at the time lay in its unadorned simplicity. To engineers from the West, the ramifications of this finding proved astonishing, verging on the inconceivable. By the year 1942, virtually all American bombers came equipped with advanced self-sealing fuel tanks as an indispensable element of their construction, without a single notable exception. The formidable B-17 Flying Fortress had integrated these tanks, starting with the B-17C variant, which debuted back in 1941. Similarly, the B-24 Liberator included them right from its initial XB-24B prototype. This level of safeguarding extended even to agile featherweight fighters such as the formidable P-38 Lightning and the stalwart P-47 Thunderbolt, both boasting thoroughly shielded fuel setups. These self-sealing tanks relied on a clever multi-layered rubber material that expanded on exposure to aircraft fuel whenever struck by gunfire or shrapnel, swiftly closing breaches and averting massive fuel spills, as well as the outbreak of lethal blazes. Although this innovation imposed a considerable burden in terms of added mass on the planes, it unequivocally boosted the odds of aircrews emerging alive from battles. Shaped by a contrasting philosophy, U.S. military strategy viewed such extra weight not just as tolerable, but as a vital imperative, utterly indispensable for safeguarding its skilled pilots and crews. In stark contrast, Japan's flagship land-based bomber, the workhorse churned out by the thousands and deployed throughout the sprawling Pacific expanse, lacked any such defensive measures for its fuel tanks against the harsh demands of warfare. Allied analysts could instantly discern the dramatic reductions in weight achieved by foregoing self-sealing mechanisms, protective plating encasing the critical fuel reservoirs, and onboard fire-quelling gear. Yet the toll in terms of fallen airmen, those intrepid Japanese aviators consigned to these fatal flying coffins, grew painfully clear through the escalating toll of casualties marked by each skirmish and every incinerated debris field. In January 1945, the seized Betty bomber at Clark Field offered the fullest and most thorough technical examination possible. Major McCoy, along with his committed group of specialists, devoted a grueling 3-week period to carefully taking apart, recording, and scrutinizing each component of the undamaged aircraft. The resulting in-depth document, marked secret and quickly shared across every Allied aviation unit, provided a precise breakdown of the features that accounted for the Betty's remarkable, seemingly implausible strengths, as well as its disastrous built-in weaknesses. By exposing and unraveling the details of the G4M Model 1, this analysis uncovered a design that prioritized with unyielding intensity nothing but endurance in distance and velocity. The Mitsubishi G4M bomber, often called the Betty, boasted an unloaded mass of just 6,141 kilograms, a strikingly modest figure given its impressive dimensions, reflecting the spare and efficient approach championed by designer Honjo. With a maximum gross weight reaching 9,500 kilograms at takeoff, it could accommodate a substantial bomb load. Yet, what set it apart most dramatically was its fuel storage. A total of 4,180 liters held in 8 tanks that offered no protection whatsoever. Each wing housed 4 of these tanks, located right in the broadest, most central area of the wing, which unfortunately made them prime targets for enemy strikes coming from nearly every direction in battle. Achieving a peak velocity of 428 kilometers per hour, roughly 265 miles per hour, it stood out as a swift performer among bombers of its era. Even more remarkable was its operational reach of 634 kilometers, more than 3,700 miles, which positioned it as the farthest flying bomber operational globally when it first entered service. Capable of climbing to a service height of 8,500 meters, it could fly higher than numerous initial generation interceptors and ground-based defenses. Its team of 7 aboard, comprising the pilot, co-pilot, navigator, bombardier, radio specialist, and a pair of machine gunners, faced equal peril without shielding. The arrangement of its fueling setup laid bare the aircraft's inherent risks, almost predetermining its vulnerabilities. These 8 containers formed 4 pairs, aligned lengthwise along the wing where it connected to the main body. By situating them in this way, the design cleverly exploited the wing's bulkiest region to store the enormous fuel volumes needed for such extraordinary distances. However, this choice inevitably placed the tank squarely in the line of fire from hostile assaults, ensuring that shots fired from the flanks or underneath would almost certainly rupture these critical reservoirs. The fragile aluminum build offered absolutely zero safeguarding. Without any self-sealing materials at all, even minor hits from small rounds, impacts that bombers like the B-17 or B-25 could endure with just slight fuel seepage, resulted in non-stop leaks, transforming the plane into a soaring fire hazard. U.S. designers carefully determined that ditching these vital defenses, self-sealing tanks, protective plating for fuel compartments, and fire-extinguishing mechanisms cut more than 500 kilograms from each plane's total mass. That considerable reduction in weight immediately boosted onboard fuel reserves and delivered the greater operational distance the Imperial Japanese Navy yearned for so urgently. Yet the price paid in terms of fragility was just as precisely measurable and utterly horrifying. Detailed engineering assessments have since validated the battlefield accounts, revealing that any strike on the wing sections of Betty bombers almost invariably triggered catastrophic explosions. Engineers identified the unshielded fuel tanks as a critical failure point, an essential component so vital that its compromise virtually ensured the total destruction of the plane and everyone aboard. Such stark, unyielding data unveiled the deep and sorrowful narrative behind engineering decisions forged nearly 10 years prior, back in September 1937, as the Japanese Navy laid down exacting, seemingly unattainable specifications that would shape the G4M's fate from inception. Among these were mandates for a maximum velocity of 398 kilometers per hour, an operational height of 3,000 meters during cruise, and an extraordinary endurance of 4,122 kilometers without payload, dropping to 3,700 kilometers when loaded with a hefty 800 kilograms of bombs or torpedoes. These rigorously ambitious stipulations mirrored the overarching naval doctrine of Japan during the closing years of the 1930s. As Japan's expanding imperial domain extended over expansive seas, its freshly acquired lands and key military aims lay divided by thousands of kilometers of relentless ocean. The naval forces urgently required aircraft designed for long-distance bombing raids on adversary sites well beyond the modest capabilities of planes launched from carriers, machines that could launch from shore installations to bolster sea campaigns throughout the sprawling expanse of the Pacific region. The bombers then in use by Japan, including the contemporary G4M Nell model, proved woefully inadequate for such ambitious demands, offering just a top reach of about 3,000 kilometers. Even the initial models of the American B-17 exhibited ranges that were more restricted still. In 1937, not a single operational bomber across the globe possessed the capacity to hit objectives at the extraordinarily vast separations that Japanese strategists anticipated for their impending wars. Far from being mere fanciful notions, the Navy's specifications arose from precise assessments of the enormous spans that their troops would have to traverse during any prospective clash in the Pacific. Spanning the distance from Formosa to the Philippines at 460 miles, from Rabaul to Guadalcanal at 600 miles, and from the Japanese home islands to far-flung objectives scattered throughout the vast Pacific, stretching thousands of miles, the aircraft designed to fulfill such extraordinary demands would grant Japan an unmatched ability to extend its strategic influence and launch attacks over immense ocean barriers, a capability unmatched by any other power in the world. Yet these rigorous specifications also embodied a set of core, deeply flawed premises about the nature of upcoming conflicts, premises that would ultimately lead to disaster in the most profound and heartbreaking ways. Influenced possibly by their initial triumphs and a steadfast commitment to aggressive strategies, Japan's military strategists believed that the advantage of unexpected strikes combined with sustained offensive momentum would adequately shield their extended-range bombers from harm. They further presumed in an overly hopeful and doomed fashion that opposing air forces would face such constraints in distance and quantity that they could not mount a serious defense against raids conducted from afar. Most perilously, they reckoned that any ensuing conflict would conclude swiftly and conclusively, wrapping up before adversaries could ramp up their manufacturing might to unleash an unstoppable tide of resources. In the relentless and merciless trials of the Pacific War, however, each of these bedrock beliefs shattered completely and disastrously. The daunting challenge of realizing what appeared unattainable rested with Kiro Honjo, an exceptionally talented and determined designer who assumed leadership of the Mitsubishi development group following Joji Hattori's departure. Far from being inexperienced, Honjo brought a wealth of expertise to the project. In the early 1930s, he had refined his skills by immersing himself in bomber development at Junkers in Germany, where he carefully studied the latest European advancements in aeronautical engineering and sophisticated production methods prior to his return to Japan. With a stark and immediate insight, he recognized that fulfilling the Navy's bold demands would require concessions of such extreme nature and inherent peril that air forces in the West, shaped by their distinct moral standards and supply chain strengths, could never countenance. At Mitsubishi's Nagoya plant, Honjo gathered a committed group of specialists, charging them with confronting the immense hurdles of the aircraft's creation. This group launched a thorough examination of all possible elements in bomber construction, precisely determining the allowable mass for each part and subsystem. Drawing lessons from bombers built by various countries, they persistently pinpointed every potential opportunity to shave weight while preserving the framework's essential strength. Undeterred, they tested fresh building approaches and novel substances that promised vital reductions in mass, potentially averting disaster. The core calculations proved starkly straightforward, their reasoning pitiless and absolute. For the plane to attain the demanded unparalleled distance, it demanded an enormous, virtually unprecedented volume of fuel. Every liter of aviation gasoline carried about 0.8 kilograms. Thus, a vast 4,180 liters equated to roughly 3,800 kilograms of fuel alone when fully loaded, a crushing load indeed. With such a tremendous fuel burden, reaching the necessary velocity required the aircraft to have the lightest possible unfueled mass. Any extra kilogram in that base weight would inevitably cut into either the essential distance or the crucial cargo allowance. These twin imperatives, vast range demanding heavy fuel loads and the lightest feasible empty structure, stood in stark, unbridgeable conflict. Fuel itself imposed a hefty toll. Moreover, and most critically, defensive features carried significant heft. Armored shielding, totaling hundreds of kilograms, proved indispensable for safeguarding the operators, key power plants, and essential flight controls. Tanks designed to seal against punctures, vital for endurance in combat, imposed extra mass via their intricate rubber linings and the beefed-up framework needed to contain them. Systems to combat fires contributed further pounds. Backup safeguards, commonplace in American and European builds, piled on even greater tonnage. The total mass from sufficient defenses, as the designers determined with grim precision, would doom the G4M to fall short of its mandatory, inflexible operational targets. At that juncture, Honjo reached the pivotal call, the one determination that would shape the entire tragic operational history of the G4M, a determination that would consign thousands of lives to flames. Defensive measures would yield to operational prowess. The fuel reservoirs were fabricated from bare aluminum, entirely lacking any self-sealing additives. Surrounding the fuel compartments, there existed no protective armor sheathing, nor any sophisticated mechanisms for quelling fires except for rudimentary and insufficient portable extinguishers, nor any duplicate protocols for safeguarding. Each kilogram trimmed away, each gram meticulously eliminated from the blueprint, got channeled with unrelenting focus into amplifying the volume of fuel, prolonging operational distance, and fulfilling the rigorous benchmark set by the Japanese Navy. This choice came after careful deliberation. Honjo was anything but misguided. The designers fully recognized the grave dangers involved. Their group carefully assessed the exact weaknesses that undefended fuel tanks would unavoidably introduce. They grasped with unflinching clarity how damage from battle to the wings would likely result in total disaster. Yet they equally understood that the Navy's extraordinarily demanding standards could not be fulfilled through any alternative means using the technology and resources accessible in the closing years of the 1930s. The harsh dilemma boiled down to selecting either a plane that achieved the desired capabilities despite its glaring, inherent flaws, or one that fell short of the criteria but provided stronger safeguards. Above everything, the Navy insisted on superior performance. As a talented yet limited innovator, Honjo supplied that very excellence. On October 23, 1939, the initial G4M prototype soared into the air, embodying a graceful and potent design that not only fulfilled, but greatly outperformed all the Navy's outlined benchmarks. It achieved velocities beyond what was anticipated. Its operational distance went further than the boldest estimates, and its bomb load capability precisely matched the demands of missions. Production soon commenced for this aircraft, officially known as the Navy Type 1 attack bomber, with Mitsubishi constructing the planes in its extensive facilities located in Nagoya. The early variants, labeled G4M Model 1, started arriving at frontline squadrons of the Imperial Japanese Navy during April 1941. Come December 1941, around 180 G4Ms stood ready for duty, serving as the sturdy foundation of Japan's shore-based aviation strength across the expansive battles of the Pacific War. The inaugural combat engagements of the Betty, marked by the devastating assaults on Clark Field and the legendary epical destruction of Force Z, vividly underscored the eerie prescience of Honjo's strategic emphases amid the unique circumstances of early 1942. In scenarios of scant resistance, total operational shock, and missions conducted well outside the reach of adversarial aircraft, the Betty proved ruthlessly potent. Emerging as an unmatched instrument of destruction, its vast operational radius enabled attacks launched from sites deemed secure and unassailable by foes. Its formidable velocity facilitated swift incursions into enemy zones, affording defenders scant opportunity for response. Its generous ordnance capacity inflicted profound, debilitating harm. Yet these early dominant edges hinged utterly on a single perilous premise, that squadrons of Bettys would encounter only token, insignificant resistance. The instant U.S. air defenses bolstered, the instant enemy intercepts turned commonplace and anticipated, the instant prolonged, attritional warfare emerged as an unavoidable norm. Each engineering decision favoring endurance over safeguarding swiftly morphed into a nightmarish verdict of doom for the courageous but fated Japanese pilots manning these splendid yet critically vulnerable aircraft. The Guadalcanal Offensive, a savage and drawn-out contest over a barren atoll in the Pacific, served as the unforgiving forge that laid bare the inherent lethal weakness at the heart of the Betty's conceptual framework. Between August and October 1942, an unyielding cycle of erosion exacted a heavy price, claiming over 100 G4M bombers and their invaluable aircrews in a ceaseless hemorrhage that Japanese aviation units, for all their starting vigor, proved unable to endure. The sortie of August 8th stood out as a grim, sobering benchmark, with 18 out of the 23 deployed planes obliterated and roughly 120 airmen slain, a crushing setback to an outfit that had appeared unassailable just months prior. This grim rhythm echoed with merciless, spirit-breaking regularity across the entire theater of operations. Mitsubishi G4M bombers, known as Bettys, would launch from the base at Repulse and cover a grueling 600-mile journey to reach Guadalcanal, where they clashed with American pilots who grew bolder in numbers and ferocity, leading to devastating and irreplaceable casualties for the Japanese. On August 9th, the toll mounted with further aircraft downed. August 10th saw even heavier setbacks. As August drew to a close, the once formidable 4th Air Group, a key pillar of Japan's aerial might, lay in ruins as a fighting force, its resources crippled and its aviators largely wiped out. The month of September offered no relief or easing of the grim campaign. Squadrons of Bettys pressed on with their futile and exorbitantly priced assaults on U.S. targets around Guadalcanal, while pilots from the American side, gaining assurance and proficiency from their base at Henderson Field, kept inflicting lopsided, crushing defeats. The brutal calculus of wear and tear proved unyielding, persistent, and merciless in every way. The Imperial Japanese military urgently required attacks on U.S. holdings to challenge dominance over the island, which served as a crucial anchor in the Pacific theater. Only the Betty bombers, distinguished by their exceptional reach, offered a practical method for launching substantial assaults from the remote outpost of Repulse. Yet each operation, each frantic flight, inflicted irrecoverable damage, steadily depleting the limited reserves of skilled aviators and seasoned air crews in Japan. The bleak trend persisted without interruption through October. U.S. air defenses grew robust as additional fighter units reached Henderson Field, introducing fresh planes along with eager and resolute flyers. The proficiency of American pilots surged markedly, fueled by the swift buildup of battlefield expertise. Their combat strategies adapted with shrewd precision, tailored precisely to target all identified weaknesses in the Betty design. Even as the pool of Japanese bombers fit for deployment shrank, their casualties mounted rapidly, trapping them in a relentless spiral of depletion. Come November, as the Guadalcanal offensive concluded decisively with the enemy's retreat, the toll on Betty aircraft surpassed an astonishing 100 machines. The death toll among their crews neared 700 personnel. The attrition rate proved entirely untenable. The Imperial Japanese Navy's premier long-distance shore-based bomber, emblematic of its expansive air power, had been cruelly outdated by its intrinsic weaknesses, shifting from a dreaded instrument of destruction to what U.S. aviators, blending somber admiration with cold-blooded precision, mockingly dubbed easy meat. Certainly, Japanese strategists had anticipated casualties, as every wartime endeavor carries the inevitability of sacrifice. Yet the magnitude of Betty casualties, the alarming pace of depletion, surpassed all forecasts, all computations, all somber assessments from before the conflict. Those exposed fuel reservoirs which enabled the remarkable 6-kilometer endurance also ensured, in a heartbreaking irony, that strikes to the wings or body would almost certainly end in catastrophe. Survival offered no partial reprieve, no crippled planes dragging back to base for future missions, no impaired yet restorable machines. The Bettys came home unscathed, an infrequent stroke of skillful dodging and fortune, or they erupted in a horrifying blaze, vanishing into the merciless ocean depths. Come the middle of 1943, the brutal truths of battle were impossible to ignore, even among the most resolute optimists in Japan's design teams. Urgent alterations to the Betty became imperative, a frantic bid to curb the ruinous toll. Beginning with the 603rd Unit off the assembly line that March, a partial makeshift solution emerged. 30-millimeter rubber linings were fitted below the wingskins over the fuel compartments. Importantly, these were no genuine self-sealing systems. They represented a basic interim fix, imposing scant extra mass, yet delivering only meager, insufficient safeguards against fuel spills. This alteration, an unwilling acknowledgement of defeat, exacted a heavy price. It diminished the aircraft's peak velocity by 9 kilometers per hour. The overall operational distance shrank by 315 kilometers. Regrettably, even with these concessions to capability, the odds of crews enduring battles exhibited no notable or quantifiable enhancement. Those rubber linings could perhaps delay the escape of fuel from impacts by lighter projectiles, granting only a momentary ephemeral respite. Yet they failed at their core to avert devastating blazes sparked by heavier projectiles or artillery projectiles. They proved unable, in a vital sense, to halt detonations triggered when incendiary bullets set off fuel fumes, a frequent hazard amid intense dogfights in the skies. The essential perilous flaw persisted unaltered, an enduring, unspoken verdict of doom. In a bid to address their mounting vulnerabilities, Japanese engineers turned to enhanced defenses in the G4M Model 3. a version that arrived all too tardily in October 1944. At last, this iteration incorporated genuine self-sealing fuel tanks, yielding to the harsh demands of the conflict. The added bulk of the sealing substance and its extra mass necessitated a grudging cut in fuel load to 4,190 liters. Although this change bolstered the plane's chances of survival, it slashed the top range to 3,640 kilometers, more than 2,000 kilometers shorter than that of the initial far-reaching G4M Model 1. Sources vary, but between 60 and 91 units of the G4M Model 3 were built before the war concluded. Yet, this vital upgrade, designed to preserve lives, proved devastatingly overdue and produced in numbers far too scant to alter the Betty's dismal battlefield legacy or stem the tide of Japan's crumbling campaign. Come the closing months of 1944, the United States held such unchallenged and crushing command of the skies that neither improved tank shielding, nor any structural tweak, nor the sharpest feats of technical innovation could have enabled the Betty bombers to function viably under the sun against the unified power of the Allied aviators. By that point, the conflict's resolution was already sealed beyond any doubt. The G4M's infamous susceptibility had gained such widespread notoriety, marking it with such profound tragedy, that U.S. military units started exploiting the plane in tactics that starkly exposed the deadly perils confronting Japanese pilots. During the events of April 18, 1943, this bomber unwittingly served as the tool in the demise of Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, an operation that underscored the peak effectiveness of American code-breaking prowess while revealing the aircraft's deeply rooted lethal flaws. U.S. cryptanalysts, laboring with relentless skill and insight, managed to capture and decode vital Japanese transmissions that revealed Admiral Yamamoto, the mastermind behind the Pearl Harbor assault, planned to journey by air from Rabaul to Bougainville on that very date. As an indispensable figure in strategic planning, the Admiral would make the trip inside a G4M, shielded by a squadron of escort fighters. The task of downing the transport fell to 18 P-38 Lightnings from the 339th Fighter Squadron, though just 16 took to the skies after one plane experienced a tire rupture during takeoff and another encountered severe problems with its drop tanks. Success hinged on navigating with unparalleled accuracy, pushing the limits of what pilots could achieve. These fighters needed to cover more than 400 miles, skimming just above the waves to evade enemy radar, chart a course through endless expanses of sea lacking any reference points, and hit the precise ambush location right on schedule. The slightest navigational slip, the tiniest delay in arrival, or even a small computational oversight could doom the effort, letting the key planner of Japan's sea power slip away unharmed. The chance to strike had to fall within a brief precarious interval when Yamamoto's plane lay exposed. At precisely 07:25 in the morning, the P-38 fighters lifted off from Guadalcanal, their engines humming with a subdued growl as they passed over the sea. For more than 400 miles, the pilots skimmed a mere 50 feet above the water's surface, enforcing absolute radio quiet that underscored their ironclad focus. They charted their course using dead reckoning, guided by flawlessly accurate timekeeping. The squadron reached the designated rendezvous spot with such pinpoint reliability that it etched itself into the annals of aviation legend. Right at 09:34 hours, spot on with the timetable, yet a full minute before the projected encounter, the P-38s detected Yamamoto's convoy, a duo of Betty bombers traveling at low level, shadowed by 6 Zero fighters that provided a tight and menacing defense. Displaying composure like tempered steel, Captain Thomas Lanphier and First Lieutenant Rex Barber split from the main body to strike at the bombers, even as their fellow pilots deftly warded off the pursuing Zeros. Barber zeroed in on the front Betty bomber, the very plane bearing Admiral Yamamoto. Damage struck the wing region, hitting the exposed fuel tanks dead on. Living up to its notorious lethality, the bomber erupted in a fireball without delay and hurtled down in a savage wreck into the heavy jungle canopy below. The next day, Yamamoto's remains were retrieved. The admiral had succumbed to the trauma from the disastrous plunge. The other Betty bomber suffered a similar end, smashing to the ground and dooming its entire crew. The mission showcased various facets of the Allies' dominance. U.S. signals intelligence had seamlessly captured and deciphered intricate Japanese transmissions. U.S. strategists had pinpointed the ambush moment with exacting 1-minute accuracy across a 400-mile expanse of sea. U.S. pilots had carried out the strike without a hitch, even amid daunting navigational hurdles. Moreover, the G4M Betty bomber's built-in weaknesses had ensured that any effective ambush would prove deadly. Yamamoto's plane stood no chance of enduring the assault. Its unshielded fuel reservoirs meant that even the slightest impact would spark disaster, converting the bomber into an airborne inferno. The G4M's susceptibility came to its starkest and maybe most pointless climax on March 21, 1945. From Kanoya Air Base, 18 such bombers lifted off, each one slung with an MXY-7 Oka rocket bomb attached below its belly. This Oka, a fearsome device, consisted of a manned rocket-driven plane packing a 1,200-kilogram explosive charge, built exclusively for suicide runs on U.S. naval targets. To succeed, the Betty carriers needed to approach within 20 kilometers of enemy vessels prior to unleashing the Oka. Once freed, the pilot would fire up the rocket engine and hurtle downward at over 650 kilometers per hour straight at the American fleet, embarking on a suicidal final plunge. The payload's enormous 1,200 kilograms of high explosives would surely obliterate whatever ship it hit. Yet the whole endeavor hinged entirely on those Betty bombers enduring until they closed to the hazardous drop distance. The squadron took off from Kanoya around 14:30. Yet, as the G4M bombers, now weighed down by their Oka payloads and cruising at a reduced pace, neared the U.S. naval group, radar picked them up. An imposing squadron of F-6F Hellcats from Task Force 58, under the command of Ben F.E. Papa Keel, received directions to engage the enemy. With the savage intensity forged through endless months of grueling warfare, the Hellcats descended upon the Japanese aircraft in overwhelming numbers. These G4M planes, burdened by their lethal loads and equipped with scant protective firepower, turned out to be heartbreakingly vulnerable prey. Within a fierce and rapid dogfight that endured no more than 20 minutes, every one of the 18 bombers fell to enemy fire. None of the Oka devices ever took to the air in combat. In the fierce battles above Okinawa, roughly 130 Japanese aviators lost their lives, encompassing both the regular crew members and the specialized Oka operators they transported. This ill-fated endeavor, a last-ditch effort mounted by the Imperial Japanese Navy, ended in utter catastrophe and served as a grim, poignant illustration of the G4M Betty's profound weaknesses when confronted by superior, contemporary fighter aircraft. The G4M Betty, derisively nicknamed the Flying Zippo by its adversaries, remained in production right up to the war's conclusion, albeit with dwindling output and frantic makeshift alterations. Its early prowess stemmed from an uncompromising emphasis on endurance and velocity, sacrificed at the altar of defensive measures, which bestowed upon Japan a decisive edge in the opening phases of the Pacific conflict. The aircraft proved instrumental in sinking capital ships, extending influence over vast expanses, and upending Allied expectations regarding the nature of air combat. Yet this superiority proved short-lived, resting on concessions that could not endure over time. With the escalation of Allied aerial might and tactical refinement, alongside enhancements in U.S. fighter capabilities and the accumulation of hard-won expertise among their aviators, the Betty's built-in frailties sealed its doom. Those very attributes that had rendered it a fearsome asset, the unshielded fuel reservoirs and scant protective plating, now rendered it a veritable inferno in the sky. Countless courageous Japanese pilots, compelled to pilot these impressive yet lethally imperfect vessels, sacrificed everything due to a doctrinal approach that exalted striking power over the survival of those who flew them. The harrowing observation made by Major Frank T. McCoy at Clark Air Base during January 1945, where he encountered those vulnerable fuel tanks laid bare, simply validated the harsh lessons etched in the Pacific War's grim ledger. The Mitsubishi G4M Betty bomber stood as an engineering triumph of the conflict's initial stages, yet it embodied one of its cruelest, most ironic contradictions, a far-reaching vanguard weapon that harbored in its core architecture the inherent potential for its own blazing demise.